Welcome to Butchering Deer for Dummies. Anybody can do this. Anybody can. This is a blacktail deer right here. You've got your hams, your front shoulders, your neck meat, tenderloins, backstraps. That's pretty much the ins and outs of it. We're going to show anybody can do this. Anybody out there that has any bit of a know-how how to use a knife and kind of just what the things to look for. What I do always when I'm butchering like deer or elk, I have two categories. I have grind and I have steaks. I know the cuts that I need to make, and I'm going to show you guys those cuts that you can make to make steaks out of your meat, and then the rest we're going to just put into the grinder and make hamburger out of it. Very, very simple. Anybody can do it. This is Cutting Deer for Dummies. So this is a blacktail ham. This is going to be the leg off the back of the deer right here. This is the outside of it. That's the inside of it, because you can tell by the ball joint. I always start on the outside. That's what I do to separate the muscle groups, to make it simple and easy. What you're going to see here is you're going to see a natural line, a white line on this, and it just runs right down almost the center of the ham. That's going to tell you exactly where to cut. All we're doing right now is separating muscle groups, and then we're going to get into the steak side of things and how to cut those, trim silver skin and stuff like that. Very, very simple stuff. Like I said, anybody can do any of this.
Why do you define things between inside and outside? What's kind of the reasoning there?
A lot of it was, for me, is like I have a place where I like to start.
Yeah.
So I'll have, like I said, like this natural line. And so if I do the same thing every single time on every ham, and when you get into your elk, they're going to be exact same.
Yeah.
Any deer, any elk are going to be exact same muscle groups. And so I'll put the ball joint down on the table.
Perfect.
And I will just start on this line right here and just barely cut into it. And as you just barely cut into it, if you look at this, I can put my finger all the way in the muscle group. All I'm doing here is just slowly cutting into the muscle group, so it just keeps it one single muscle group.
If you're someone who's never done a deer before, how are you seeing where the muscle groups are?
So I cut that line, and so all it is, as you can tell here, it just cut through the outer skin, or not the skin, but the outer fascia is what it is. And then if you look in here, so you see all these bubbles, right? That's going to separate muscle groups. So that's what's going to actually separate all of the tendons and ligaments and all that. And so I'm just barely touching with a knife here, and you can see this whole muscle group. It's its own thing, right?
And when you're separating muscle groups, you're never actually cutting meat, correct?
Never cutting meat. No, I mean the edges, like about the very edge, yeah, I'll cut a little bit of meat here. But when you're in the muscle group itself, no, it's just some fascia and maybe some fat and stuff like that. You can see there's some stuff in here, and then what you're going to get is the artery. So this is going to be your femoral artery that goes to that back hip. So I'm just going to take it, I'm just going to cut this whole thing off right here, because this is going to be one of our steaks. So there is one great muscle group. So then I've come back in here, and I've got the ball joint right here, and I'm just going to cut down to that ball joint.
And you're still on the outside face, correct?
But you're still on the outside
towards
face.
The middle, yeah.
Correct.
And now this would be the front of the quarter.
Correct.
Yeah.
The top side of the quarter, I guess, is how you'd put it. And so, and I'm just cutting down to the bone here. And you can see the bone right there, the leg bone. I'm just going to cut all this off. So everything that I'm cutting off and just letting it rip, it's all going to go into grind. I'm going to trim some of this silver skin off of it in just a little bit, but so I won't care about those pieces as much, because they're just going to get chewed up into tiny pieces.
So that was just the top piece off the outside. That's not a bigger group. That isn't good as a steak. Correct.
And so what I'm going to do with this is, it's the round is what it is. And so this thing is also good. The third category we could throw into in Deer Meat for Dummies here is we could take this, we could cut this off right here, and then you could cut that up and make roasts out of it, crock pot, whatever you want. There is silver skin, a couple few pieces of silver skin in this thing. If I dissect it just a little bit here, you'll get to see all that silver skin that's in there that you'd have to trim away. And then there's two more chunks actually in there as well. So it's not as good for steaks, right?
And why is that? So like when you have a silver skin in the middle of a steak, what does that do to it? Why?
Just when you're eating it, you know, it's just like middle of the road, just,
another thing that you have to bite through.
It is, yeah.
So I like you think that it's a tough steak, but really you have a silver skin right in the middle, because you have conjoining muscle groups.
And then if you trim all that silver skin out, especially like on the round, on a deer, on an elk it's different, it's bigger. Yeah. On a deer, you get these two little tiny chunks.
And that's why it makes a great pot roast, right?
Which is great, yeah. You can quarter this.
Leave it as a bigger chunk.
Giant chunk. So what we'll do is like, okay, how big's the family that we're gonna go for? Okay, let's just do that right there. This is a whole big roast for a whole night of whatever you want. And so I will vacuum seal all that, and man, you can put that in a crock pot. It's gonna be you know,
Yeah.
super awesome. So,
And for all the muscle groups that are touching the bone, how are you peeling the meat off the bone? Is that kind of like your actual skinning process in a way?
a little bit,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's more or less just kind of just getting it as clean as you can. So I go, you know, close to the bone as we can. We don't want to waste anything, obviously. And
Yeah.
with these bones, you could boil them. You could do whatever you want to later on. Everybody does their own different thing. So here's the back tendon. Obviously, I'm just going to cut that off. There's a ton of silver skin all on that. So that'll just go to waste. And then I'm just going to just peel these other chunks off. So this chunk I'm going to actually use for steak right here. This will be a great steak chunk. But everything else is not going to be steak. It's all going to go into grind. So I just want to just get the stuff that I know that I'm going to steak up, and then the rest, I'm just going to throw it in the bucket. And that's where I think a lot of people get like, I don't know, what do I do with this,
Yeah.
you know?
And what you did, you just flipped to the inside,
Yep.
right? So you made your first cut on that from the outside, but
Yep.
now you're on the inside to get a better angle on it.
Now just to get a better angle, I'm just going to flip it over, and I'm going to take this whole chunk right here, which is a great steak chunk. So I'll cut this down and cut it off the leg. So we're going to cut those two up in just a second for steaks. And then all the rest of this like calf meat and stuff like that, I'm just going to just take this, trim it as close to the bone as I can, and all this is going to be burger.
So off your hind quarter, you have two main muscle groups that are good for steaks, and the rest of it's kind of good for grind or roast, pretty much.
You can do like you can have round steaks, but
Yeah.
in deer, in my personal, I just there's not enough. I would rather have roasts.
Yeah.
They work great for roasts. Some of these I will touch up.
So when you say
Silver
touch
skin.
up, what are you doing? Now that you have all your muscle groups off the bone, it's time to clean them, right?
Correct. So like
So what are you looking for when you're trimming them up
Stuff
to
like-
get them to the next stage?
okay, so stuff like this, right? Yeah, like this silver piece of skin and stuff like that. Some of the silver skin I'll even grind. Like there's some of this I'll leave in, and it'll grind it awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll be just fine. But just, you know, kind of trimming the stuff that needs it. So let's get to the steaks, guys. Biggest part in cutting up your deer meat for dummies here, okay? Everybody wants a venison steak, right? That's what I'm
Yeah.
looking for.
So how do we
okay?
take it from this muscle group to those neat steaks?
Totally.
And make it look
Because grinding is
professional?
grinding, right?
Yeah.
We put it in the grinder, that's not hard. So what we're looking for here is the grain of the meat. Remember that, okay? So I turn this over, and I'm gonna cut steaks out of this. I'm gonna obviously trim it first. I'm gonna trim this white stuff off of it, and you'll see that here in a second. But I'm looking for the grain of the meat. And if you look at this grain of the meat, you can see it running this way, right?
Generally vertical.
Yes, this is what I want. I want it to be all running the same way. Obviously, it hits this other muscle group, and then you get this other pattern of grain over here. I'm going to cut that out, and you're going to all see the same grain of the meat. So again, going with the fascia, going with like just let it tell you where you need to go. The meat, like you can see
Yeah.
the silver skin that separates it. I'm just going to go right against that and cut that off.
So from that
there.
bigger muscle group, there was another one.
Yes.
You're trimming that off, and
And I'm
now you
just-
end up with pretty much a perfect rectangle now.
Yep, and I'm just trimming that silver skin. You can see it right there. Just trimming that off to where it's just one big piece of just straight grained meat.
So now that you have that, and you have your main muscle group that you're going to end up cutting into portions for, you know, family-sized meals, now you're trimming it again. What are you looking for when you're trimming here?
What I'm looking for here is just like, when I eat a steak, I don't want to have anything in it. I want it to be squared up. I want it, and actually when you're butchering something, you want it to look good. You want it to look clean. You don't want to just have an old hunk of meat that you're just like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't know what the heck that is. See all this like silver skin stuff? Just take it, run your knife down it.
And this part's kind of like filleting a fish, right? Like you're trying to take the least amount of meat off that you have to that comes along with the outer stuff, correct?
Yes, I am, yes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm not getting super nitpicky to where it's just like, oh man, I can just leave that in. I want the best tasting steak that I can get. So I'm going to go over this a number of times and just really be meticulous on it, because especially like a deer, guys, you're gonna get about maybe 3 packages of steak out of a deer. I mean, for a bigger family, you know, that you're gonna do. So
Yeah.
it's not like you're going to get a ton of meat. It's like the meat that you do get, let's make it awesome. So when you have that for the kids are in love with eating deer meat.
So in this trimming process, it's completely different, right? So you're just going in with your knife almost at the same angle as the meat and just cutting just
Correct.
a flat, thin amount off.
Correct. And then just like, I'm just making this to where it's just a pristine piece of edible meat here. We're just about there on this. And so when I talked about grain earlier, right? So see our grain? it's kind of going like this. So it's not super straight like to what we have cut, but it's for the piece of chunk of meat that it is. I'll show you how to kind of get around that. I'm going to cut steaks directly against the grain. That's what you do.
So even if that's not necessarily the best usage out of it, that's what you're going to do?
Yes, correct. Because I'm high grade, utilizing all the meat that I have here.
Yeah, you're not losing any meat.
Right.
There's going to be
and
diagonal.
So a thing to remember too, like if you're going to do jerky, if I'm going to make jerky out of this, which why would you? But if you are, I'm going to cut them lengthwise, right? I'm going to cut with the grain. And I'm going to cut little slats of jerky with the grain. If I'm cutting steaks, I'm cutting against the grain. Those are the two different cuts that you have to remember as far as like steaks are against the grain, jerky, you're going long ways with the grain.
So what's the reasoning there? Why are we cutting it against the grain for steaks?
So when I'm eating a piece of jerky, right, it's just like that. I got it, it holds itself together. It's a stringy piece of meat and everything. A steak, I want it to be tender. So I want that grain to be short, and I want it to be, when I'm biting it, I want it to be just against the grain and cut it with my teeth and everything, and it'll chew better. It'll be a lot more tender.
So it's always easier against the grain.
Correct.
Right? And so with a piece of jerky, then when you're biting it, you're actually cutting it against the grain with your teeth. Okay.
Correct. So we're at the steak cutting process. See how clean this all is? Looking good. Perfect. All right, so we got our piece of meat right now. Now we're going to the best part of the whole process. We're cutting some steaks. So I'm going to go directly against this grain right here. Like I said, make them look good. Take your steak, square it off first, put that in the grind, and then I make my deer steaks, I make them pretty small, just because I don't like a giant piece. Some people would take this right here and do, I think they call it carnivore style or something, and just cut a big chunk out and then freeze that and cut their steaks later. I like to cut them right now. It's just the way I do it. So I'm just going to take, and I just do about 1/2 inch steaks is what I do.
So there's two schools of thought there, right? People who like to cut the steaks already, freeze them that way. They might be easier to thaw. It's less work to do when you're there. And there's other people who like to leave it almost looking like a roast, knowing that that's going to be steaks, correct? And both are completely
just different ways that you want to cook them.
Yeah.
So this is going to be our steaks, our starting of our steaks. And again, even though it looks like I'm kind of going wonky a little bit here, I am going just directly against the grain of this steak.
And if it's not super obvious, against the grain, what he's talking about is like 90-degree angle. So if your grain's going this way, his knife is directly at a 90-degree angle from the grain. That's good, awesome venison. So I'm just going to clean this whole piece up, just like I did that one, and then we'll cut steaks out of this one as well. All right, so let's do that. Okay, that was a hind quarter, guys. So we have all our hamburger stuff in here and our roast that we're going to put in. There are 2 different roasts that we did. And then this is our steaks that we're going to actually put in the bag. There's not a ton of them there, but a deer is not very big. An elk is a different story. So you actually really get something there. But these are going to be precious little victuals that you are going to enjoy. What are some of the benefits of doing this at home versus seeking out a butcher, learning to do this at home,
Absolutely.
having that ability?
A couple different things, honestly. Well, first thing, money. Times are not awesome right now as far as in our economy, and so doing it yourself can save you a lot of money. The big one for me is the pride issue. I killed it. I went out there and killed. Well, okay, I didn't, but okay, come on, it's for everybody.
It's my buck, but it's for everybody.
No, but it's the pride of, you know what? From the time when that animal had breath in it to it on the table and actually nourishing us and giving us protein. You know it every single step of the way. All right, here is your front shoulder of a black-tailed deer. All right. Looks intimidating because it's got a bunch of different things going every which angle and everything. The big thing about this is there's not much to it.
Where are we located on the actual front shoulder here?
So on the outside, this is going to be the outside of its shoulder. Inside would be in here, where you cut it right off the rib. I'm going to do that last. First thing I'll do is the outside. Very simply, on a front shoulder, there is a steak actually that sits on the shoulder blade. I think it's called the flat iron steak, I believe. Yep. So this is the front of it right here. This knobby part right here, this would be its back elbow. Okay. So what I'm doing first is just putting my hand on it. It's all meat, right? Until I get to here, and then that is bone. That is the #1 thing that a bow hunter does not want to hit on an elk, even a deer for that matter. It is a ridge of bone that comes up on its shoulder blade. That's where I'm going to start this cut. So I'm going to find that with my hand, and then you can just easily, I mean, it's hard right there. And so I'm going to get really tight to that and cut down it.
So you said this steak lays right on the bone, right? And it lays in a corner of bone. So understanding that kind of helps you
cut your first one, right?
Correct.
So how does that bone actually lay? Is it a plate with a ridge in the middle?
Yes, I'm gonna expose it here in just a second. So why I do it this way and why I start this way is because, like I said, it's like it looks intimidating, but a lot of this, like this is all burger. You know, you're gonna cut a lot of this stuff off. It's gonna be burger on 90% of this front shoulder. For me, when I cut mine, I'm going to stake this one little tiny section underneath here, and I'll show you how to get to it. And it's very, very simple. But after that, like all of this, like this front section and everything, I'm gonna burger that. I'm gonna grind it. We like our burger a lot. And when I cut steaks, I want the best premium steaks. I don't want to try to make something out of nothing that's there.
So you're gonna get that steak out of the way, then from there you don't have to worry about cutting in all the perfect places. You have your steak out of the way.
Correct.
And then you can just get the meat off the bone the easiest way.
Just get the meat off, and because it's all gonna go in that grinder and spit out in tiny, tiny little sections anyway. So I'm just gonna use my knife and just fillet down.
So now you've worked to the top end.
I've turned it over, and so I can have an easier access at the shoulder blade itself. And so what I'm talking about here, give me 2 seconds, I'm gonna show you.
And you're just following that bone, peeling the meat off of that actual plate, right?
Correct.
Because the back ham, we pulled it off of a round bone with a ball joint. There was no flat section.
Nope. So this is it right here, guys. This is going to be from this ridge to this spot right here is going to be a small piece of steak that you can cut off the front shoulder. And so I'll show you how to get that. Come down here and just cut that piece out is what I do. And then I'm going to trim this part later. So this is your steak, if you can see it right here. It's not very big, but it is a good piece of meat. All I do from there on, guys, is I bone the shoulder out, just like you would if you're out in the woods and you're, you know, trying to save weight and not have the bones with you. So what I'll do is I'll take and come my knife up the bone, feel the bone in there, come right down to it, and just cut around that bone. There are a ton of things that you can do with the front shoulder, guys. It doesn't have to be just this, but this is what I like to do, and this is so you're not intimidated by making these cuts and stuff. So let's hold the rest of this shoulder. I'm gonna just trim this whole thing and just get the meat off of it, and because it's gonna go in the grinder. So all this is just gonna go to grind.
So some of these other big muscle groups that are on the front shoulder that wouldn't necessarily be a good steak, can someone, if they like a lot of pot roast or like pulled meat or stuff, could they take this and still use it for that?
Totally. Yeah, you could take any of these chunks and do, you know, slow cook on anything,
Yeah.
right? You could definitely do. You could another big thing that I love to do is can it. So and you can can. I mean, you can even can the calf muscle, and it has all that sinew and everything in it. And that canning, well, actually, that pressure will break down those barriers. So there's a lot of different things you can do, but we're just showing you the easy way if you want to try to get yourself some steaks on the table and some grind for burger and everything. This is the best way to do it. All right, guys, so we've deboned everything from the front shoulder. We put it in the hamburger bin, and all we have is that little flat iron steak that's underneath. It's not that big, so I'm just gonna trim it up here. All right, square up the end, and then start making my steaks. Let's move on to the neck meat. Very simple. Neck meat. These are just the big sections that were around the neck of the deer. So from the front shoulders up, this whole piece of neck meat. What we're gonna do now, honestly, what I do with all neck meat is I burger the whole thing. Like I said, there's a lot of different things that you can do with a lot of different pieces of meat and everything, but for this video, we're just gonna burger it. So all I'm doing is cutting it into chunks that are small enough that I can fit it through the grinder. So I'm just gonna hack it up to where it'll easily fit in the grinder, and it's as simple as that.
And I think, like we've talked about, how to get, like for grind, it's pretty simple, right? You can't mess it up. Cut it into stuff that's going to fit in the grinder. So for on this other side, what are some of the options that you can do with neck meat?
Man,
for someone to look into if they've never.
My favorite thing to do with it is can it.
Yeah.
That's what I do with it. So that it's a great spot because it'll fill a jar really well, and just can it, throw it in the canner, and then you can eat it years down the road.
Yeah.
You know, it preserves it for a long time. So that's my other favorite thing to do with it. All right, guys, the elusive, awesome backstrap. There is 2 of these, and these lay right down the back of the animal on each side of the vertebrae on the backbone. So then they're just 2 long strips. So it looks like a giant piece of meat, but you'll see as we trim it up, it starts to get shorter and shorter and smaller. So a lot of this, not a lot, but some of this will go to grind still. But as you can see, that big piece of silver skin, in the back strap. We're gonna trim all that off to where this is gonna be probably your best table fare of the deer, as far as steak wise.
And unlike the other ones that we've done, right, this is already into your one muscle group, correct?
Right.
So how are we going to approach this differently? Or do we just skip the separating step, and just moving right into trimming? Or are we still going to separate? What are we doing here?
We're still gonna do both. So as you can see, I just kind of gave a little pull on this, and that's just by hand. You see all that silver skin right there, all this sinew. Actually, we're gonna pull all that off, and you can honestly do it by hand. You can see as of right now. I'm just gonna really trim this, okay? So there's not muscle groups in here, but there is groups of sinew that run in different directions on the very outside and then on this front face side too.
So even though this is one of the most tender cuts, again, that could get in the way
100%.
of you enjoying that steak.
It could be a chewy mess if you just go like this and just start cutting steaks out of it. So you need to, taking care of the meat and doing the best thing for it is, it's paramount. But like I said, I'm not just gonna throw that away. I'm gonna cut that sinew out of that, because if you look at it, see that long, this is what they make bowstrings out of back in the day for, I think, indigenous.
That'd be a short bow.
It's a smaller string. Maybe they take it a little ways, or tie it together or something. Anyways, but yeah, you don't want to eat that. That is going to be,
Point being, it's really strong.
It's really strong. But then the rest of this stuff, you can throw in, you can grind it. You know, don't ever neglect something like, don't just chuck it in the trash when you can actually grind it and make something edible.
No, there's meat attached to it, right?
Correct. And so now it's just the tedious time of cutting everything off of the backstrap. So,
and you've mentioned being able to grind the silver skin, but there's kind of a difference, right? Like you're not just grinding silver skin. It's when there's a lot of meat attached to it, to where if you were to trim it, you're actually going to lose a lot of meat.
Yes.
And you're not grinding like the really thick parts like that, right?
Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm like this. I mean, look at that. That thing has got some teeth on it.
Yeah.
No, we don't.
So we're not grinding that.
Nope, we're not going to grind that. We're going to cut all of that out. So,
again, this is kind of like the filleting a fish method, right? Going flat.
That's what I like to do. And
find your depth and just kind of go.
So like you can see through it. So you're not wasting a lot of meat. There's still little tiny pieces on here that you could take and probably fillet off of here, but... And then guess what? That's going into the grind. That's all going to be meat.
So all that stuff adds up.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And then, like I said, you took all the time to shoot this animal, and you don't want to waste any of it. There's no point in it. So
now we're just trimming, right?
Just trimming.
Since you got that main kind of like fascia out of there, now you're just trimming to get it pretty, like you talked about.
And so what I will do honestly too is I'll just cut it in half like this, and then just work with smaller sections at a time, so you don't have this big section going over, you know. So I'll cut it in half, and then just see like that big piece of skin, silver skin right there. Just start cutting down it, expose it out, find out where it goes. There it is, and it comes right off. All that's going to go into grind still. So, all right, so I got a pretty darn good piece of steak right here. And just the trimming, I mean, trimming goes a long ways when people are eating your food and they're like, man, that was the most tender steak that I've ever had. Well, it's because of what you're doing right now. It's the preparation of getting it to be that way, instead of just being like, oh, that'll do. Yeah. Don't do that. So that one's done.
People always talk about gaminess too, right? Which I do think like wild game just has a different flavor, where if you're not used to it, that is part of it.
Sure.
But a lot of that too is from people not cleaning it properly, right?
Correct.
So if they're leaving a lot of that weathered outer layer, that crust, any blood in there, anything like that.
Correct. Because right now, so from the cooler, it's got some dried skin on the outside, or not skin, a dried kind of a layer on the very outside.
Kind of a crust, right?
Yeah, I'm taking all that off.
It's everything that the air has touched while that deer is aging.
Yeah, I'm gonna trim this up to make it look as good as I can get it.
So the big thing with trimming, right, is depth, correct? So how do you know how deep to cut to get all that stuff off? Are you just going down until you see clean meat?
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll take a real thin swipe at it like I just did there. And so see how it turns from that browner outside, that crust, to that real red meat?
Yeah.
That's when I know I've gone far enough. And so I'll just kind of depth gauge the whole thing that way.
So I got this little piece of sinew here on the side still. And then she's ready.
So with that crest, is there a difference? Like if you hang your deer for 1 day or for 10 days?
Depending on a lot of that. So what you're going to dive into there on that side of things is going to be the humidity in your cooler. How much, you know, what kind of refrigeration system you're doing. How much humidity is in the air at the time. What time of year is it? How dry is it out? Elevation. All those things have a factor in that side of things.
But in general, right, the longer you're hanging it, probably the thicker that outer crust is going to be.
Can be, yeah, can be. And I always say, like with wild game, I say anything, you know, I've done a ton of studying about it and everything, and I used to like hang it for, shoot, up to 15 some odd days. It seems like with wild game, after 3 days, you're going to get the same thing that you're going to get. And people will disagree with that, I know, but the more I've studied into it, the more I see like it doesn't have the marbling like a cow does, like a finished off beef with fat in it. It doesn't have. It's a lean animal, and so it doesn't have that fat that breaks down that muscle. You're just gonna get what you get. So anyway, this is the backstrap, just the one side, and so we'll do just the same thing that we did just on the ham steaks.
And the cool thing about the backstrap is the grain is pretty much.
It's all there. So if you turn this over, look at all that grain going this way.
It pretty much runs front to back as the backstrap does.
Correct.
So that one's pretty easy to square off.
Pretty cut and dried. Just get in there and clean them up as much as you can. Get all that sinew. Like if you look at like this, like my knife, I can just push down and it cuts right through the thing. I don't have to really move it. So, which tells me, wow, that is going to be some tender meat. The backstrap is the most tender spot other than the tenderloins, which is what we're going to do next. But you'll see that the tenderloins in a deer, there's just not a lot there. All right, so there's your back straps, guys. Not a ton there, but man, the best meat on a deer in my opinion. So let's move on. Well, okay, second best. Best is the tenderloins. Let's throw a tenderloin up here.
That's what you're doing?
I love tenderloins. The tenderloin. Tenderloins are not big, guys, on a deer. Anyway, on an elk, you got a little bit more to it. Yeah. On a deer, they're not. That's why sometimes we do call it camp meat as far as when we kill a deer, let's get those tenderloins out. Let's eat them within the first day or so, because after you put them in the cooler, as you can see, they kind of dry up a little bit, and it's just not a very big piece of meat. Yeah. But it's called tenderloins for a reason. Super tender. So same as the backstrap, I'm just going to clean the heck out of it. There's one little tiny piece of silver skin in this. Other than that, it's pretty cut and dried. It's just a round tubular piece of super tender meat.
Yeah.
So.
And you're already into the muscle group, right? So all you have to do really is just clean it up.
Just clean it up. So I'm just going to take this little piece of skin out of there, and then there you have it. So some would call it the medallion of the deer world. And another thing you can do with these guys, instead of doing the steaks, I know this whole deer meat for dummy thing, we're doing steaks and grind, but like you can take this, I've done it a number of times, it's like, let's take this, let's wrap it in bacon, and let's just throw it, however you want to do it. Yep. So, and then honestly, it gives you the ability to not have to, you can cut it up after it's cooked.
More than just bite size.
Yeah, these are just going to be little bite size, little nuggets is what they're going to be, but they're going to be really, really good. And there you have it. So that's one tenderloin and one backstrap of a deer right there, guys. And so everything that we've already done, we're gonna flop it over and do the other side.
Yeah, I think with that we're done, right?
I think you've done a whole deer, guys. Like we said, anybody can do this. Anybody pick up a sharp knife and be like, okay, I'm going to cut my own game up this year. Yeah. Get in there yourself. It's very, very simple, and do it yourself. And man, the feeling when you do eat your own meat at the table, it's awesome. It's awesome.
And I think that's not to say like we don't use butchers too, right? Because a lot of times when we're on trips, going state to state, we're going to drop it off at a butcher, have it get done, because we're going to be gone for the next month, right? Sure. So we have nothing against that, but it's just it's really good to have the tools, I think, to be able to do this. If another COVID happens, for any reason at all, just to have these tools, I think
gives you another
important.
Tool in the toolbox.
Yeah. And if you guys are wondering even how to get to this step, right? Because we started quartered, we started with our back straps or tenderloins out. We haven't done it on a deer yet, but we'll do that soon. But we have an elk video that will link right here in a card or in the description. And it's the same as an elk, just smaller. Yep. You're going to quarter it the same way. You're going to get the back straps out the same way. Every single thing is the exact same. So if you're wondering about that step even before this, we have that too.
Yep.
You can do everything. You can get out there and you can, from start to finish, from shooting it to eating it. And I encourage everybody to do so.